If you've ever thought to yourself, "Am I losing it? Am I going crazy?" This video is definitely for you. If your memory's been failing you, if you're experiencing a mental fog you just can't seem to shake, if nothing seems to make sense anymore, if you look at your life and feel like everything you've built is collapsing around you, take a breath. What you're experiencing has an explanation, and it's not craziness, because it's not depression, and it's definitely not what you think it is. It's something much deeper. Something that Eckhart Tolle understood firsthand, because his own family thought he was losing his mind too, and he almost believed it himself. Today, I'm going to show you what's really happening when your mind feels like it's disintegrating. Why this discomfort is actually a sign that something much larger is happening within you, and why the worst thing you can do right now is try to go back to who you were before. If you stick around until the end, I'm going to give you a simple technique that Tolle uses to navigate these moments without getting lost in the chaos. But before we go any further, I need to tell you a story. The story of how Eckhart Tolle almost ended up being committed. Back in 1977, Tolle was 29 years old. He was living in a near constant state of anxiety, experiencing long periods of profound depression, plagued by suicidal thoughts that would appear without warning. He was studying at Cambridge, an intelligent man, well-educated, with a promising future, but on the inside, he was falling apart. On one particular night, he woke up with an anguish so intense that he described it as, "I could no longer live with myself." The pain was unbearable, and in that moment, something broke within him. It wasn't a gradual improvement, it was a collapse. The mental structure he knew simply crumbled. In the days that followed, he stopped studying, abandoned his doctorate, began wandering aimlessly through the parks of London, sleeping on benches, spending hours sitting, staring into nothingness. He lived like this for almost 2 years. His family was terrified. They considered him irresponsible. And, more than that, they thought he'd gone completely insane. And who could blame them? A brilliant man who suddenly abandons everything to sit in parks and sleep on the streets. And here's the point I need you to understand. If someone looked at Tolle back then, from the outside, he looked completely dysfunctional. He looked like a man who had lost control of his own life, someone who needed urgent psychiatric help. But what was happening on the inside was completely different. Tolle describes that in those months. He experienced a peace he had never felt before, a clarity that didn't come from thought, a presence that was more real than anything he had ever experienced. He was going through what many spiritual traditions call the dark night of the soul, that moment when everything you thought you were falls apart, and you're left in the void, without references, without solid ground. And it looks a lot like madness, because in a way, it is a form of madness. It's the necessary madness for something new to be born. Now let me ask you something. Does what you've been feeling lately resemble this? Mental fog, a sense that nothing makes sense anymore, memory lapses, difficulty concentrating. That feeling of being between two worlds, of no longer being who you were, but also not knowing who you're becoming. If you said yes to any of those things, I need you to know something very important. You're not going crazy. Your brain is reconfiguring itself. Recent research in spiritual neuroscience shows that during intense periods of transformation, the brain undergoes a process of reorganization. Old neural patterns begin to dissolve, new connections begin to form, and during this process, you can experience exactly what you're feeling now. Confusion, disorientation, the feeling that your mind is failing, but it's not failing. It's rebuilding itself. A researcher named Lisa Miller has spent years studying this at Columbia University. She discovered that the human brain possesses specific circuits that activate during experiences of connection with something larger. She identified 3 main neural networks that strengthen during a spiritual awakening. One related to the feeling of being loved and supported, another related to receiving inner guidance, and a third related to the feeling of unity with everything. When these circuits strengthen, the entire neural system undergoes a reconfiguration. It's as if the brain is being reprogrammed to operate in a completely different way. The problem is that during this reconfiguration, you can feel completely lost because the old system hasn't been fully deactivated yet, and the new system isn't completely online yet either. You're literally between two worlds, and that's exactly what the mental fog is telling you. And here's the danger I need to alert you to. Many people who go through this are misdiagnosed. They go to the doctor, tell them what they're feeling, and receive a diagnosis of depression or anxiety or something worse. And I'm not saying that these diagnoses are always wrong. There are real cases of conditions that need treatment. This is serious and important. But there are also many cases of people who are simply going through a profound transformation, and who, by being treated as sick, end up interrupting a process that could be the most important thing in their lives. Tolle talks about this. He says that there's a very fine line between spiritual awakening and mental breakdown, and that the difference often lies in how the person interprets what's happening. If you believe you're going crazy, you're going to fight the process. You're going to desperately try to go back to who you were. You're going to medicate yourself to silence the symptoms, and that can create even greater suffering. But if you understand that this is a passage, that it's a dark tunnel that leads somewhere, that the disorientation is temporary, then you can go through it in a completely different way. Remember when I talked about Tolle's night? That night when he said, "I can no longer live with myself." He says that in that moment, something interesting happened. When he thought that phrase, he realized that there were two I's there, the I who couldn't live, and the I with whom he couldn't live. And that perception changed everything. He asked himself, who is this I who can't live with another I? Could there be two of me? And it was in that question that the collapse happened. The I he thought he was, the I constructed by the mind, by the thoughts, by the stories he told about himself, that I simply dissolved. And what remained was something much vaster, much more stable, much more real. That's what's happening to you right now, even if it doesn't feel like it. The old self is dissolving. The mental structures that have supported your identity are falling apart. And that's terrifying, because you feel like you're losing yourself. But you're not losing you. You're losing the image of you, the mask, the persona, the construct, and underneath that construct, there's something that can never be lost, something that predates all thoughts, something that observes all this confusion without being affected by it. That's the real you, and it's emerging now. I know this can seem very abstract, so let me give you something more concrete. Have you ever noticed that even in the midst of the confusion, there's a part of you that observes the confusion? When you think, I'm confused, there's something in you that perceives that confusion. When you think, I'm lost, there's something that registers that thought. That observing part is not confused. It never is. It's pure stability, presence, consciousness. That's what Eckhart Tolle discovered that night. And that's what's revealing itself to you now, through this apparently chaotic process. But before I continue, I need to tell you about the 3 stages that you'll go through in this process. Because understanding where you are can make all the difference in how you deal with it. The first stage is dissolution. And this is where most people feel like they're losing their mind, because everything that seemed solid starts to unravel. Your certainties, your beliefs, your identity, even your sense of reality can feel unstable. In this stage, you may experience a range of physical symptoms too. Tolle mentions this: aches and pains in the body with no medical explanation, profound exhaustion, alterations in sleep, a sensation of being disconnected from your physical body, memory that doesn't seem to work right. This happens because the nervous system is undergoing a radical change. The body is adapting to a new configuration of consciousness, and that takes time. The mistake that many people make in this stage is trying to fix things, trying to go back to what it was before, frantically searching for solutions, making important decisions in a moment of confusion. What Eckhart Tolle teaches is the opposite. In this stage, the most important practice is to do nothing. Allow, observe. Let the process happen without interference. That doesn't mean being passive in relation to your life. You still need to take care of your basic responsibilities. Go to work, take care of your family, maintain the essential structures. But it does mean not trying to rebuild your identity in the middle of the dissolution process. That would be like trying to build a house during an earthquake. The second stage is the void, and this is perhaps the most difficult, because after the old structures dissolve, you're left in a space of not knowing. You're not who you used to be anymore, but you're also not yet who you're becoming. This stage is described in various spiritual traditions. The medieval mystics called it the cloud of unknowing. The Buddhists speak of the bardo. Psychologists talk about psychological limbo. They all describe the same experience, and this is where the temptation to go back is the strongest, because the void is uncomfortable. The mind hates not having answers. It wants to categorize, define, control. It desperately wants something solid to cling to, but you can't fill this void artificially. If you try to put a new identity in place of the old one, before the process is complete, you'll only create more suffering. The void needs to be inhabited, traversed, allowed. And this is where the practice of presence that Eckhart Tolle teaches becomes absolutely essential. Because when you anchor your attention in the present moment, the void stops being threatening. It reveals itself as space, as potential, as freedom. Many people who reach great spiritual depths describe this void as the most transformative moment of their journeys, because it's in the void that they finally found what cannot be lost. The third stage is emergence, and this is what comes after traversing the void. A new way of being begins to arise, not as a mental construct, but as a natural expression of your deepest essence. In this stage, clarity returns, but it's a different clarity. It's not the clarity of obsessive thought trying to control everything. It's the clarity of presence, of direct perception, of connection with something much bigger than the individual mind. People who go through this process describe a fundamental shift. They still have thoughts, they still have emotions, they still have a personality, but these things no longer define them. They know they are something much bigger than the mind, and that shift is permanent. Once you awaken to this, you can no longer fall completely asleep. The illusion has been seen for what it is, and there's no unseeing it. Now, I need to tell you about something very important, something that differentiates a genuine spiritual crisis from a psychological emergency that needs professional attention. Because there is a difference, and it's crucial to know how to distinguish between them. Experts in transpersonal psychology have identified some signs that indicate when the experience is becoming dangerous. The first sign is the loss of basic functionality. If you can no longer take care of yourself, if you've stopped eating, if you can't get out of bed for days, if you're neglecting basic needs, this needs professional attention. The second sign is when thoughts become obsessive and paranoid. If you start to believe that you're receiving special messages in everything, if you see conspiracies everywhere, if you feel that external forces are controlling your life, that's different from awakening. The third sign is complete isolation from reality. If you lose the ability to connect with other people, if consensual reality no longer makes any sense, if you feel completely disconnected from the physical world, these are signs that you need professional help, from a therapist, from someone who understands both the spiritual and the psychological aspect of what's happening. Don't be ashamed to seek that help if you need it, but if you can still function, if you can still work, even with difficulty, if you can still connect with some people, if you still recognize reality, even feeling that it's changing, then probably what you're going through is a profound transformation and not a pathological breakdown. And there is a way to navigate this that Eckhart Tolle teaches, and that I'm going to share with you now. The practice is simple, but extremely powerful. When mental confusion comes, when you feel like you're losing your footing, said when your thoughts become too chaotic, do this. Stop. Wherever you are, just down, stop. Feel your feet on the ground, literally. Feel the weight of your body being supported by the earth. Feel the solidity beneath you. Now, look around you, not with an analytical mind. Just look. Observe the colors, the shapes, the objects, without naming them, without judging them. Just then feel your breath. Don't try to control it. Just notice the air going in and out, the movement of your chest, the sensation of the air in your nostrils. In that moment, you're doing something very important. You're stepping out of the mental whirlwind and into presence. Confusion only exists in the mind, in thought, in the past, and in the future. It doesn't exist in the now. When you anchor your attention in the present moment, the confusion loses its power over you. It might still be there in the background, but it doesn't dominate you anymore. This is what Eckhart Tolle was doing during those months sitting in the parks of London. He wasn't running away from life. He was practicing presence in such an intense way that the process of transformation could happen without resistance. You don't have to abandon your life to do this, but you can use this practice whenever you feel you're losing yourself. There's a second practice that complements this one, and it's specifically for the moments when anxiety and fear appear along with the confusion. Eckhart Tolle calls this observing the observer. It works like this. When you realize you're in a panic, that your mind is firing off thoughts that something is terribly wrong, that you need to do something urgent, now, stop and ask yourself this question. Who is perceiving this panic? Don't try to answer intellectually, Anoma, just feel it. There's something in you that is aware that there is panic, that something isn't in panic. It's simply observing. When you find that point of observation, you discover that there's a place in you that has never been affected by the chaos, that has always been calm, that has always been present. That's your anchorage during the storm. The more you practice finding that place, and the more stable you become, even when everything around you seems to be crumbling. There's a third practice that I want to teach you, and it's specifically for when the confusion becomes so intense that you can't even do the other two. I call this the practice of surrender. It works like this. When everything seems like too much, when you feel like you can't take it anymore, when your mind is so chaotic that any attempt to practice seems impossible, simply say to yourself, I surrender to this. I'm not telling you to give up. I'm not telling you to accept the madness. I'm telling you to stop fighting against the process. Resistance is what transforms transformation into suffering. When you resist what's happening, you create tension, you create pain, you create more confusion. But when you surrender, when you allow the process to happen, when you stop fighting against the disintegration of the old self, something changes. The same experience that seemed unbearable becomes merely some intense. The same confusion that seemed like madness becomes merely sized change. The same pain that seemed like destruction becomes merely transformation. Eckhart Tolle describes this in a very beautiful way. He says that suffering only exists when there's resistance. When you stop resisting, what remains is just the pure experience. And pure experience without resistance is always manageable. So when nothing else works, when you feel at your limit, just surrender. Say yes to what's happening. Allow it to pass through you. You won't break, I promise. What might break are just the old structures, and they need to break so that something new can be born. Here's something that maybe you don't know. That feeling of going insane, that confusion, that disorientation, it's temporary. Researchers who study experiences of spiritual transformation have discovered that there's a pattern. The confusion comes first, then comes a phase of integration, and finally comes a new clarity. a clarity that's much greater than anything the person had before. The problem is that many people give up midway. They feel the confusion and can flee. They try to go back to who they were before, or they medicate themselves to suppress the symptoms, or they simply panic and get stuck in that state. But those who manage to get through, who manage to endure the disorientation without completely identifying with it, who manage to maintain a thread of presence even in the midst of chaos, these emerge, transformed. Let me tell you what happens on the other side. People who go through this process report some very specific changes. First, they describe a dramatic reduction in mental noise, that voice that never stopped, that commented on everything, that judged, that worried. It doesn't disappear completely, but it loses volume, loses urgency, loses the power to control you. Second, they report a much greater ability to be at peace, even in difficult circumstances, not because the circumstances have changed, but because their relationship with the circumstances has changed. What used to cause panic now causes only observation. What once seemed unbearable now seems manageable. Third, they describe a feeling of connection that doesn't depend on anything external, a presence with themselves that is sufficient, a fullness that doesn't need to be filled by achievements or relationships or possessions. And fourth, and perhaps most importantly, they describe a clarity about who they really are, no longer defined by thoughts, no longer imprisoned in the stories of the past, no longer scared of the future, just present, just conscious, just alive. That's what awaits you on the other side of this. Confusion. And I'm not saying this to minimize what you're going through now. The pain is real. The confusion is intense. The fear of going crazy is genuine. But I'm telling you this to give you a reason to continue, to show you that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that this suffering is not in vain. Eckhart Tolle is a living example of this. He went through what seemed to be madness and emerged as one of the clearest voices about consciousness and presence that exist today. And it's not just him. Countless people throughout human history have gone through similar processes. The mystics of all traditions describe this journey, the death of the old self, the crossing of the void, and the rebirth into a completely new way of being. You're not alone in this. You're walking on a path that millions of people have already trod. And those who arrived on the other side left. Maps, they left. Practices, they left. Guidance. This video is one of those guides. If you've made it this far, I want to tell you something important. The very fact that you're watching this, the fact that you're seeking to understand what's happening, the fact that you haven't given up and haven't simply accepted that you're losing your mind, that already shows there's something within you that knows, that perceives that this is bigger than it seems, that intuited that the mental fog is a passage and not a destination. Trust that part of yourself. It knows the way, even when the mind doesn't. And if this content has helped you understand what's happening, if it's given you a little peace about the symptoms you're feeling, super thanks is a way for you to say, this made a difference to me. And every bit of support helps me continue bringing this kind of content to more people who need to hear it. Now, before I finish, I want to leave you with something important. There's a quote that Eckhart Tolle said that summarizes it all. He said, "The disintegration of the old must happen before the new can emerge. You are in that disintegration now. And I know it's uncomfortable. I know it's scary. I know it seems like everything is falling apart, but pay attention to this. That which is falling apart was never the real you. It was a construction, an identity based on thoughts and memories and social roles. And what is emerging from beneath that which observes this whole process, that which remains stable even when everything else seems chaotic, that is the true you, and it cannot fall apart, and because it was never constructed. So, breathe. Anchor yourself in the present. and allow this process to happen. You are not going crazy. You are finally becoming clear. Now, tell me in the comments, are you also going through this? Do you also feel this mental fog? This sensation of being between two worlds? Share your experience. I read and respond to all the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, someone who is feeling lost or confused about what's happening, send them this video. It might be exactly what that person needs to understand, that they are not alone. I'll see you in the next video.